Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar using technology to combat rogue R&D claims. The session today will last for approximately 30 minutes where we will be exploring the recent changes around the R&D tax credit claim process, introducing R&D tax credit software solution WhisperClaims with a short demonstration. We'll also hear from Lawrence from Caldwell, Penn, who will share how this software is being used in his business. If you have any questions during this session, please post them into the Q&A panel on your screens, and we'll do our very best to keep to time. So if there are any that we can't cover today, then we will follow up with these after the webinar. So now for some quick introductions to the speaker panel today. My name is Lamorna Harris and I'm one of the product managers here at Wolters Kluwer, and I've been with the business for 23 years. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Lamorna. So I'm MD at WhisperClaims. We're a software provider and we specialise in helping accountants to build R&D tax claims quickly and easily and in a robust way to meet all of the requirements of HMRC. Our business was founded in 2018 and the original founders all had extensive experience of the R&D tax consultancy market, so that end of the market. And we were suffering with a number of frustrations, not least amongst those was the fact that consultants charge very high contingent fees in this marketplace that are not often reflective of the amount of effort that's gone into building a claim. And that closes out many SMEs. So most of those consultants effectively ignore the bottom end of the market simply because a small claim represents a small fee and it's not worth them doing it. So we were frustrated by that. We were frustrated by the quality of help and advice out there in the market, and also to an extent frustrated by the fact that accountants seem to ignore the market. And we felt that software was potentially an answer to that problem. So founded in 2018. Since then, we've built a team of 11 people. All of our product development is done in-house. We've generated around 1,500 claims through the software so far. That represents around £200 million worth of eligible spend. So about £50 million worth of tax benefit to our customers' clients. So quite a journey. And pleased to welcome Lawrence along to this chat, who's been a long-standing customer of ours. So over to you, Lawrence.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I'm a director at Caldwell, Penn, and we're a firm of chartered accountants and tax advisors based predominantly in London and Surrey, but serving a kind of wide geographical range of clients. I mean, we tend to support startups and SMEs and mainly focus on their finance functions and sort of wider tax planning. So R&D forms a real key element of what we're doing for them. And particularly amongst sort of innovators, entrepreneurs, and as I say, those growing SMEs. So that's where Whisper came in. That's why we sort of wanted to partner with them to make our kind of R&D element of our tax service as kind of as efficient and as kind of best as it can be to ultimately give our clients some really, really good service.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lawrence. And just tell us a little bit about life before WhisperClaims. So how did you used to go about putting R&D claims together, or did you use third parties, or did you have clients who were using third parties?
Yeah, honestly, I think it was a pretty small makeup of our kind of service. We historically kind of bundled it in with our corporation tax returns. So very much an historical approach to sort of supporting and guiding clients when it comes to R&D. We did the corporation tax return. If we spotted some R&D, we I'd say half-heartedly do an R&D return. And ultimately, I think that's where Whisper's helped us quite a lot, is in terms of streamlining that process, because what we're trying to do is focus on a more real-time kind of collaboration with our clients, where we're identifying that R&D much sooner, almost in year, month to month, and then letting the process kind of take care of itself at the end, and making it as kind of scalable and achievable as possible without draining resources. So it's really helped us identify those claims, educate our clients, and ultimately kind of fend off, I think, the interest from those third-party consultants that are often circling around to try and nab our clients, I think, particularly when it comes to R&D.
Absolutely. And would you, I often hear our users talk about the kind of lack of control in that scenario. So things like being worried about the fact that a third party is interfering with a CT return, for example. It's quite an uncomfortable place to be.
Yeah, massively. I mean, we want to, not be ultra controlling, but we want to control that process. And as chartered tax advisors, we want to give that rounded advice and make sure that it's ultimately, meeting the HMRC criteria and it's serving the client right. And I think when you lose that element of control, and third parties start getting involved, it can become a bit, dangerous territory, should we say, and undermines the trust the client has in us, but then equally is very frustrating because a lot of the time that advice is built on, not so strong foundation, should we say.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sort of building on that, have you got any observations about the market as a whole and some of the behaviours that you perhaps see out there?
Yeah, I mean, again, as I said, they do circle like sharks. I feel like the third party consultants. It's their business, is what they do. Particularly, having recently gone through obviously the COVID pandemic and that demand, I think, for cash-strapped businesses to seek opportunities to get tax breaks and to receive grants is kind of intensified that. And I don't know whether there's also a desperation for those businesses, the third party consultants themselves, to find more claims. So it's a very aggressive approach. And again, as I say, quite frustrating because a lot of the time they promise lucrative tax savings when sometimes, the claim isn't qualifying or it's just not the right approach for the client. So as I said, we just want to make sure that we're doing things right by the client and ultimately right by HMRC.
Yeah. I mean, we often hear, I'm sure you've heard this, people saying to me, saying things like, my mate down the pub has made a claim for X, why can't I do that? Or even worse, I made a claim last year with a particular consultant, and you're now telling me that was ineligible or it doesn't fit. Is that something that you've come across?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's sort of, if there's any sort of element of research and development, that there will be a mate down the pub or not even just research and development, but predominantly that's where you see it. I think one example I've got is a kind of branding company, insights company, and they were contacted by a third party to make a claim. I mean, it wasn't particularly big, but even still, when they're saying you can save X amount of tax, it's very hard for that client to turn down, and then puts us in an awkward position when we're saying it doesn't meet the qualification criteria. But they want to plow on anyway and get the get the tax break effectively. So it's a hard one to sort of compete with, and as I said, undermines us to an extent, but it's based on false promises. So
yes, yeah, and as you said, as chartered tax advisors, it's really critical that you don't cross those boundaries and you stay true.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
We have to get things right.
Yeah. Now, we've, from a technology point of view, we've built the system in such a way that with a sort of highly structured approach that tries to make sure that users address all of the requirements that HMRC see. But wrapped around that, we've built support, a full sort of support wrap with in-app help and support, telephone helpline, series of webinars. We've tried to sort of go to town, if you like, on making sure that the support's there to help you with making those decisions. Have you been able to access any of those services while you've been working with us?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I think that I can't speak highly enough of WhisperClaims. As fundamentally, we're trying to partner with providers that go that extra mile. Not just for us, but ultimately for our clients. And I think that's something that, as you just mentioned, all that support network that's there. Our corporate, so R&D sort of process was buried within that corporation tax return service, and now it's a fully fledged service that sits on its own and delivers something that really is scalable and unique and has that support around it to make sure that we're getting the claims right, but we're doing it in a way that helps us involve our client, getting them to help prepare the claim itself, understand what they're doing. And then equally make sure that our team is well kind of versed at what's going on and how it then formulates into that claim with HMRC, whilst having the confidence that what's backing that up at Whisper is built on sound footing and is compliant. Yeah,
brilliant, perfect. Well, but one of the things that people often ask me about is why don't HMRC police the scheme? And we join in with the RDCC R&D Consultative Committee meetings at HMRC. They're held on a regular basis, and that question does come up actually quite often directly with HMRC. And of course, the reality is they can't police the scheme. There's 80,000 or so claims going through every year. They're not going to read every one. But they are going through a detailed consultation at the moment that seems to be focused on contingent fee pricing, amongst other things. So they're starting to recognise that this kind of contingent fee approach from consultants has led to some of these bad behaviours. Inevitably, if you're pricing on a contingent basis, there's a temptation to push the boundaries in order to increase the fee. So it's interesting that HMRC have recognised that and are starting to look at it. So what's your view on pricing for these services?
Yeah, I mean, like, I have to be honest, we have and do price at the moment on a contingency fee basis, based on the cash benefit that the client's going to receive. But I think that arose from this threat of the third-party consultants. That we basically followed the market. We felt we were behind. We as I said, we didn't prioritize R&D claims, and it's quite a lucrative area. And particularly as some people that are qualified tax advisors, we do understand it when you put your mind to it. But I think we followed the market in terms of a contingency fee basis. But again, yeah, if I'm really honest, I think now the tide's turning a little bit, and it just doesn't really sit quite right. And I think we're going to move and shift back to a fixed fee model, albeit with using that contingency fee basis internally to calculate what a reasonable fee might be. Yeah. So it's kind of a litmus test in terms of what's acceptable. And we do, with a number of clients, we do agree fixed fees using that mechanism. As I said, it just feels more consistent with our wider philosophy and just really how, it should be done.
Yes, sure. And I guess that, using technology, not just for R&D claims, but more generally in the business, just gives you kind of surety on how long it's going to take to work through a process, how much time and effort is going to go into it.
100%.
And that gives you that ability to price on a fixed fee basis.
Yeah, 100%. No, yeah, to have that consistency, and equally, I think, the contingency fee, you want to do right by the client and give them the best possible claim in the way that qualifies. You don't, and I think that that's basis, as HMRC have identified to a certain extent, it incentivizes poor practice to a certain extent. Yeah. So that's we want to move away from that. But as you said, with something like WhisperClaims, it gives us that understanding of, I think, how long the process will take, the consistency, and knowing exactly, kind of what our starting point is when it comes to costs.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And just sort of reflecting on the comments, I've heard you say before that the market's a little bit like the Wild West, yeah. So you think about there being so many, I suppose, poor providers out there, and we've come across one particular pointed example. And I won't name the company here, but if you look at their website, specialist consultancy specialising in R&D tax claims for the care home sector. Now that's a sector with, I would say, little or no eligibility. It's a very rare thing to find an eligible project in that sector. And yet there's a business that's purporting to be a specialist in that area. You look at their website, it looks like there's loads of eligibility in that sector, and that could very well be tempting lots of care home providers into the space. And I guess what I wanted to do is just kind of reinforce this point about HMRC's ability to police the scheme, and the fact that just because a claim has apparently gone through, it may have been paid out, certainly been processed by HMRC, that isn't necessarily an indication that a tax inspector has read it and given it a kind of stamp of approval. In fact, HMRC can come back at any time in the future and review the claim and insist on the money being paid back, or worse, may well end up in a tribunal case. I just wonder if you've got any kind of observations about that kind of the fact that HMRC are not policing the scheme, and how you kind of need to position yourself in order to kind of cope with that. Make sure you're doing the right thing irrespective of the outcome, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I said, as I think this probably speaks for a lot of the kind of accountants in terms of that role you feel is you want to get it right, and I think that I speak for the vast majority, if not all, of people in opposition. You want to produce a compliant claim that equally makes it kind of relatively straightforward for HMRC, if they were to look into it, to go, yeah, it ticks all the boxes, it meets the criteria, it qualifies. And I think the kind of the frustration at times is that, particularly with these third-party consultants, is that it's not a level playing field, and that we're going to this nth degree to make sure that it's compliant, that it ticks the boxes, that it's good for the client, and as I said, they're making it up as they go along. Some people, and I think you see a lot of the reports in the media, and equally the one I mentioned earlier about the kind of client we had that was just not in an area, they did not meet the qualifying criteria. they got the claim, they got the money back, but it's it's a risky game, and I think you want to do right by your client, by your professional obligations as well.
Absolutely.
And that's why they don't police it, but from my perspective, every time I hit the submit button, I want to make sure that there is nothing, that it is squeaky clean, and it's easy for HMRC to review if they did review it, because I want to make sure they know that I'm doing it correctly.
Absolutely. And why would you say, given the fact that you've been doing well in this market, you've kind of entered it properly, you've built a service line. In general terms, why do you think accountants have been reluctant to enter the market? Because it's their reluctance to enter the market that in a way has fueled this increase in the number of consultants out there.
Yeah, it's a strange one, really. I mean, I think if I look at from our side, it was an education element that we sort of steered clear of it. We had one corporation tax specialist that knew R&D, that did it with the corporation tax returns. And actually we ignored the fact that I think, we've got a number of qualified accountants within our organization, and it's a scheme that is well publicized. I think that the guidance that HMRC put out is long.
Yes, it was around 500 pages.
500 pages, but actually is pretty, in terms of if you're trying to prepare a claim, it's got everything there that you need is written down. And I think particularly the support that Whisper give, but equally other kind of simplification of it is actually made it now. It is relatively straightforward to educate our staff, our clients, on how to put a claim together and what qualifies and what doesn't. Now, I think that was our failing. We didn't put enough time and effort into training and education our staff, our clients, in terms of what needs to be done, and therefore it was this big scary thing that was kind of sat there at the side, that the third-party consultants predominantly almost perpetuated that idea and built the wall around them that only we can do it, or only we've got the resources. And especially in terms of HMRC investigating things, and it's you just feel that it's going to be a lot of time and effort to make a claim, because something that valuable to the client must be complicated and it must take a long time. Yeah. And therefore the risk of it,
it's creating the notion of a black art almost.
Exactly. Yeah. And then therefore you just sort of leave them to it and they go unchallenged. And certainly that's why we thought, well, hang on a minute, we're doing complex VAT returns and VAT assessments with people, and this, to be honest, R&D is a lot more straightforward, I think, than other areas of tax. So
yeah. And to what extent do you think using technology, using our solution, has helped you kind of get through that?
Well, massively. I think I touched upon it at the start, just in terms of it providing this consistency. And us having the greater contact with our clients to identify potential R&D opportunities earlier. So that fundamentally is that we would spend countless hours preparing inconsistent R&D claims. In terms of inconsistent, in terms of we were starting from scratch every time, writing the reports, calculating the claim, bit of a scattergun, and this doesn't. Whereas what Whisper's enabled us to do is to basically make that element of the claim, particularly in terms of the report writing, it's heavily consistent but tailored to each client, and it's relatively straightforward to do via Whisper's app, which then allows us to dedicate more time at the start of the process to make sure that we're identifying and discussing with our clients R&D opportunities and preparing them for a claim in the best possible way. So it's really allowed us to have a proactive look rather than a reactive look. And ultimately that makes our clients happy and puts us in a position to have a really kind of clean, consistent claim, which gives us trust in the fact that we can, we're getting the numbers right.
Fantastic. One of the things, when we look kind of deep into our data, one of the things we've observed over time is that the majority of claims that have gone through have taken actually only around an hour from first data entry to report production. So that's taken a process that traditionally would have taken days or sometimes weeks, and particularly that kind of daunting thing about sitting down and writing a report. We're kind of taking that pain away. Would that kind of transformational effect, getting it down to a really quick process, is that something you've experienced as well?
100%, yeah. And I can't speak highly enough of that element of it in terms of the interactive nature of it, that it's allowed us to put more junior staff members onto the initial part of the process. It's quite intuitive, it's cloud-based, it works, do you know what I mean? And then the sharing it, giving clients access so they can contribute towards it in a way that, we're not having to call them up or email them and it's all a bit scatty. This is consistent and it's a nice clean way of doing it. And then, as I said, that automation that comes through on the report writing, it's a lifesaver. It really is, because historically, as I said, we would send our clients a questionnaire, and they'd come back, and then we'd be writing up reports in Word, and it would take 5, 6, 7, 10 hours to get somewhere. Where I think, honestly, now, one of the biggest things I say about Whisper is it must be a dream for HMRC to review some of these project reports when they do, because it's all laid out really nicely. It's got the key areas, it really, for them reviewing it must be really, really nice. And equally,
funnily enough, we have had feedback from several of our users that inspectors have given them that feedback, which is great. Well, you give me almost perfect segue into just doing a little quick demo of the product there. So just bear with me, and I'll share screens, and I'll just give everybody a quick view of the product to just kind of reinforce some of the things that you've said there, Lawrence. So this is a mock-up of a system dashboard. One of the things we haven't mentioned is that the product is essentially white labeled. So this is the Wolters Kluwer test account. So it's got their logo in there. So this, as I say, is the dashboard. We've got lots of stuff going on in here, which I won't bore us with for today. But if I delve straight into a claim, once I've logged in again, just bear with me a second. I'll just show a few key things in here. It would be a bit slow when we're on a live webinar, wouldn't it? There we go. So we're in the claims part of the system. So just to demonstrate that what you've just referred to, Lawrence, the kind of simplicity of the system. Most of the system's driven by checkboxes, drop-down lists, and sliders. So here you can see just at the front end, a couple of simple questions. I'm just going to get us out of the way of the screen here. And where we've got questions throughout the system, we get immediate feedback to any answers we provide. So if I just change that as this claimant to a limited company, if we change it to no, immediately the system's going to tell us that we're not eligible. We've got in-app help and support. So you can always contact us, ask any questions that you like through that section of the system. Live chat as well for the same purpose. So all of our users, as you reflected earlier on, all of our users can ask us as much about the scheme as they can about the software. So it's not just software support that we provide, it's scheme support as well. And then just to give a flavour of the kind of different elements of the system in here, again, drop-down lists, so different to the example I just gave there. And then a lot of sliders through the system. So in this particular case, we're asking about the intensity of a particular type of activity, and we're just using a simple slider to allow the user to indicate how much of a particular type of work is going on. Things like challenge level, similarly, how tough is the technical challenge that's being addressed. Again, simple scale, trivial to really tough. And again, always kind of focusing on the feedback down here at the bottom of the screen. So we're guiding people through the process as they go. Little kind of areas of complexity in the scheme, for example, grants. So here we ask, were any grants used in the time period, and we take the user through a really simple process to address how those grants have been deployed and utilised in projects. The ultimate outcome of all of that is to establish how much spend is going through particular aspects of the scheme, whether it's the SME scheme or the RDEC scheme. So all of that kind of complexity is just, as the user, you're not having to think about that at all. And that's why the process is quick. We're kind of taking that pain of thinking about the legislation and how the treatment of costs might be affected by particular choices you make within a claim. Just down in the costs area, so again, really simple ways to capture costs and simple ways to apportion them, again using sliders. And when we get to the end of the process, we're able to review the entire claim in this section, which gives us a rough indication of how much eligible spend we've got. In this case, we've got an SME claim with elements of spend going through both schemes, SME and RDEC. We get an overview of all the answers that we've provided. So if we were sat with a customer, we can review those answers, and if we need to change them, we can delve back into the system to do that. At the same time, we get an indication in here of how much it's going to cost us to download this report. We charge for our services on a subscription basis plus a transactional fee on each report that's downloaded. So once we finalise that claim, essentially what's happening here is the report's being written in real time in the background, and we'll get the option in a second to download it. Here we go. So we pay at this stage, download the report, and get immediate access to it. So the reason I just wanted to quickly show that is it just gives you an indication of how quick it is to generate the report. And that has two elements to it. Written element that's accounting for why all of our projects are eligible, explaining, as you said, Lawrence, in kind of simple terms, why it is that the work we've got is eligible, and it makes it really easy for a tax inspector to understand. And then right down at the bottom here, we've got a breakdown of our eligible costs, our final calculations, and our outputs there, all ready to go into the CT600 for onward comms to HMRC, which gives me a great opportunity to introduce Lamorna back into this, to just quickly show how Wolters Kluwer deal with that submission. So I'll just stop sharing, Lamorna, and hand over to you.
Thank you both. Okay, so let me just share my screen. Okay, so let's just share that. So hopefully you can see the CCH corporation tax being displayed on the screen at the moment. So what I'm going to do is just show you where to enter the figures produced from the WhisperClaims report into the CT600. Just to point out, my starting point here was to import the data from CCH accounts production. So I don't really want to manually enter that. And that's done by using the direct links option within the client. So back onto the tax return. So where do we enter the figures into the CT600? We do it via the trading income. And within the actual trade, we have this enhanced expenditure. And within here, we've got the research and development. You can see this is what I've added earlier. So we've got the type of expenditure. So I have the RDEC, and also I have the basic relief. And then it will produce the calculation within the summary. Now, the other element here is that I am going to put through a tax credit. So within the tax planning, if I then select the tax credits, I do have a brought forward figure that I've entered, which will then essentially calculate the total RDEC, which will be offset against my tax liability. So to then see the information being supplied within the CT600L, if I then scroll down, and if I just expand on page 2, we can then see my original liability was 108,000. That has now been reduced by the RDEC tax credit, because that's been offset against it, bringing it down to 104. So if I now have a look at page 4, that will just give me the information regarding the breakdown of the total R&D set off against liabilities in this particular corporation tax return. So once that information has been entered, so it's a very simple process, the final part of the journey, I suppose, is to file the return online. I've done a live submission, so I'll just show you that live submission. And within the live submission, I have the option here. I've attached the IXBRL accounts, which have been produced from our review and tag software. So if I just click onto that, we can see the accounts being attached here. Also, along with the report that I've downloaded from WhisperClaims, and if I just go to page 3, we can then see the amounts that were shown earlier regarding the SME and the RDEC. And then finally, we have the CT600 here. And if I just then go to page 13, this will then just show us again the RDEC expenditure and also the original tax liability. And that is really the end of the process. That's how we enter the R&D figures from WhisperClaims into CCH Corporation Tax.
It's fantastic. Thanks for that, Lamorna. We've had a question come through. We've had a couple of questions actually come through, so it's worth us just taking a look at those before we finish.
Yep.
First one is we had a few people actually asking whether they're going to get a recording of the webinar, which they definitely will. So I think the recording's due to go out tomorrow, so everyone can expect to see that then. And we've had a great question for Lawrence actually from John. And I must admit, I've heard this question asked before, so I'm fascinated by your answer, Lawrence. Would Lawrence qualify the financial statements where it is found a client's claim does not qualify for R&D and yet has been paid out by HMRC?
Yeah, no. It thankfully it hasn't happened to us. It was a potential client, the one I referred to before, but yeah, no. I mean, it would go down the usual routes of if it fundamentally didn't qualify, then we would, cease acting for that client if they pursued a claim anyway.
Yeah. We've seen users of ours asked a similar question, kind of related question, which is presented with an R&D claim that's been produced by a third party. Would you submit that on behalf of the client?
Well, again, it's a difficult one, isn't it? But no, we, again, probably wouldn't do that. Yeah. They again, if they do it, and we're confident that from a summary level that it does qualify or it meets the qualification, then they would submit the corporation tax submission, or they'd submit an amended one under their name rather than going through us.
Yeah,
we're just not going to prepare to take on that risk.
Yeah, and I think that's a kind of relatively recent thing. I think if we were having this conversation a couple of years ago, I think accountants were perhaps to a certain extent a little bit blind to it, but I think people are much more sensitive to that now, quite rightly, much more sensitive to
I think we found that they're quite reluctant to give the information over as well, so it makes it doubly difficult that they won't release the project report, they won't release their workings because it's their intellectual property, as they say. And to be honest, we did have one where it was a qualifying claim, but they wouldn't even release the project report to the client, which was mad, in my opinion. That how can the client sign off on something that they haven't even seen?
Yes, yeah,
crazy.
Absolutely. So lots of questions about future webinars, and again, asking for copies of the slides. So as I say, slides will be out, slides and recording will be out tomorrow, and I'm sure you guys at Wolters Kluwer will be keeping everybody informed of upcoming events. And by all means, people who are out there, please do have a look at our website too for our upcoming events, which I'm sure Ken, you'll find useful. So back over to you, Lamorna.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks very much for attending our webinar today. If you'd like more information about WhisperClaims, then please reach out to your account manager. And in the meantime, please do take a look at our latest insights on our website, or follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn to stay up to date with Wolters Kluwer. Thank you very much again, and have a great rest of the day.